thank you so much for being with us, Shirley, and I hand over to you. Thank you very much for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, and thanks to everyone for being here. Mumini Savadogo, Edie Koraf, Martin Kipping. We're expecting the Executive Managing Director of CGIAR as well, and especially our distinguished panel members. And you as guests, thank you for making your way here. It's good to have quite a few in this rather spectacular venue. I don't think I've ever spoken somewhere like this, and certainly not with this much bright light in my eyes, but it's okay. But thank you very much, too, for the opportunity to make some remarks. As you heard, I'm with ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, which is one of a family of CGIAR research centers conducting agricultural research around the world. And you'll hear from our managing director, hopefully at the end of this session today. But my job, I think, in these few minutes is to frame a little bit the broad context for what I know will be an instructive panel discussion. And I'm going to make just a few remarks in that regard on 4 areas. Why accelerating climate finance for sustainable livestock in Africa matters. What is sustainable livestock development going to look like in Africa? What do we need to think about? What should we invest in? If we actually get climate finance, what should we invest in? And how could we source that finance? Well, firstly, our topic today matters, and it matters a lot. Not least because of the role of livestock in Africa's very core. But it matters too, because if we don't take action, and take action urgently, to foster transition towards more sustainable livestock, the consequences could well be disastrous. Not only for climate, but for livelihoods, health, food and nutrition security, economic growth. Think about it for a moment. How many of you, or your parents, or your grandparents, or all of you, had livestock somehow or other woven into your family? You went to school because of livestock, or they were an intimate part of your family growing up. Probably no more than 2 generations, I would guess. Livestock are important for food security, direct food, milk, meat, and eggs, but also wider food production. Over half the staple cereals in Africa can only be produced because livestock are part of the system. And we don't want hungry people. Africa needs to feed itself, and we don't want devastating import bills for that food either. Livestock products, milk, meat, and eggs are essential for good physical, reproductive, and cognitive development. Some estimates say Africa could lose as much as 10 billion a year from undernutrition. Livestock provide jobs for something like 15% of household income across the continent on average, rising to something like 50% in pastoral areas, and provide important new opportunities for women and for young people, things we're increasingly concerned about. Across the continent, about 40% of agricultural GDP comes from livestock. So it matters, and it matters a lot. So when we consider sustainable livestock transformation, and especially in relation to climate change, we must be cognizant of 2 dimensions: the impact of climate on livestock and the impact of livestock on climate. Often that's the bit you hear more about. But that means we need both adaptation and mitigation solutions, while also balancing all those other dimensions that livestock impact on. I like to talk about the currency of sustainable livestock. Perhaps that's important given the banking context of today's meetings. By this I mean a coin with 2 sides: adaptation on the one, mitigation on the other. And for livestock, especially across Africa, that indeed is the currency, because any action on one side almost always has co-benefits on the other. So what should we be thinking of investing in? I think we can think about mitigation-driven solutions with adaptation co-benefits. Things like productivity increases through technical solutions, improving production efficiencies, which for many producers on the ground really has to look like those multiple wins of more food, more income, and so on. Rangeland management solutions, perhaps, improving carbon sequestration through grazing management, through regenerative practices. But we can also think of the other side of the coin, if you like, adaptation-driven solutions with mitigation co-benefits. Things like insurance products to reduce risk and vulnerability, market diversification, animal health solutions and their delivery, or genetic solutions, perhaps identifying animals with heat tolerance. So we need to be really smart about what those systems transformation pathways look like, how to target them. Martin mentioned the live map of the African Development Bank, which really gives quite a nice framing, if you like, to think about that diversity that we grapple with across the continent. But an important question is, where is the money? How do we access and channel climate finance to support these kinds of solutions? We know that in this space, there are global mechanisms and standards, and there's money. Last year, CO2 was trading around $32 per ton on average. If you do the maths and you look maybe even about a tenth of the CO2 across the continent, we're talking of at least 2 billion, just for starters, perhaps. But it seems maybe there's some barriers to action, technical, institutional process. We struggle perhaps with data and data inconsistencies, perhaps lack of awareness. And of course, the rather special nature, the dispersed production structures that we have in Africa. So unlocking climate finance requires a whole host of technical innovations, coordination, investment readiness, shifting the narrative about the role of livestock in this big development picture. But perhaps we have an opportunity, perhaps that begins with, in this conversation today in some sense, how to better organize and tap into financing windows, to work together, not in competition. One initiative that we hope will work in that regard is ILRI's Livestock and Climate Solutions Hub, that is building a platform that can be leveraged for partnerships, for bankable solutions, for those mitigation and adaptation options, supporting countries' climate and livestock actions in that broader context. We often hear people say, well, investing in livestock is risky. I would venture to suggest that it's much more risky not to invest. As we see agriculture in climate finance, we must make sure that livestock is part of that. It's not if, but how we bring livestock from periphery to center of climate financing, and how we do that inclusively, responsibly, sustainably, perhaps even smartly. And I think our panel is about to help us in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Shirley, thank you really for setting the scene and preparing for our experts to arrive. We would like to share with you different perspectives on the topic. We have with us another expert from the African Development Bank. I'm very happy he knows how to actually mobilize resources within the African Development Bank. We have with us Damien Imedioa, who is the manager of the Agribusiness Development Unit. Would you mind joining us, please? And yeah, warm welcome. Please join us here. We have another perspective, which is more, well, one could say, a private sector perspective or a network perspective. We have with us Mohamed Sultan, who works for the Global Methane Hub, and he has the regional lead for Africa. Please join us. And we are very curious to listen to your perspective on livestock from a global methane hub perspective. We have also with us a colleague who works for the African Union. I'm very happy to announce Mr. Patrick Karani. Are you with us? Yeah, here he is. Mr. Karani is Research Director at IBAR and has long experience in policy making. So what are the policies we need to encourage transformation of livestock? And last but not least, we also have a national perspective, very specific experiences from Senegal that Mr. Sheikh Mbao is sharing with us. He is the director of the Centre de Suivi Écologique, and he has also a very specific experience already with mobilizing climate finance because he is working for an accredited national implementation entity. And so we are also very curious to listen to your experience. We are very happy to have you with us here on this panel. And we have one question for you all, just to start with and to warm up. And that would be very nice if you could share with us. So why is the question of livestock important to you and to invest into livestock transformation? And I would like to start on the other end of this nice panel with you. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, moderator. Let me take a few seconds to convey greetings from the director of AU-IBA, Dr. Huyam Salih, based in Nairobi, Kenya. We say the green city in the sun. Back to your question, personally, I've been actively involved with a passion to participate in the development of bankable projects that would attract climate finance. And I've been engaged with the private sector to sensitize the private sector and the public on how to catalyze the interest and how they can prepare these projects to attract climate finance. But more specifically from the African Union point of view is that African Union, basically the AU-IBA, which is African Union Inter-Bureau for Animal Resources, is a technical office with a mandate to support sustainable development of livestock, fisheries, and wildlife. These are part of the animal, but they go beyond that. So these are more the specific areas. The purpose of doing this is basically to transform the livelihoods, to ensure there is food security, food nutrition, creation of wealth, employment, and poverty eradication. African Union, AU-IBA, works with member states who are about 55 on the continent, and also in addition with regional economic communities to specifically articulate and formulate policies that will enable or create an enabling environment for the member states to be able to participate with implementation of programs and projects that will enhance expansion and development of livestock. At the regional level, it's important to harmonize these policies simply because with animal resources, we deal with the transboundary issues of animal health, animal diseases, zoonoses, among others, that need to be put in check, regulated, so that livestock can be sustained. In doing so, then of course, we are aware, it has been mentioned by the earlier speakers, that livestock is contributing significantly to the economic growth and livelihood transformation. But also, it is facing the consequences or the effects of climate change, in addition to biodiversity loss, water scarcity, among others. Now, to be able to counter these threats—
I think you have more time for your second question.
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
That is fine.
Yeah,
so in conclusion, basically, I'm just trying to bring this background into the perspective as to why the AU-IBA is a true partner to participate in attracting climate finance, specifically to sustain sustainable livestock development. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and we would like to continue with AFDB once more. So what is your perspective on livestock and climate change?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, let me give thanks and kudos to my director, Martin, who is here. He's my director, so I have to acknowledge his presence and to thank each and every one of us for being here. I would like to make some fundamental statements before I proceed. I was in a meeting in Republic of Benin, and an issue came up, a statement. And that statement is, livestock is livelihood's one-stop shop. I repeat, livestock is livelihood's one-stop shop. To explain a little bit, if you want egg, you go to your farm and pick an egg. If you want meat, you slaughter a cow or a goat or a fowl and eat. If you want to pay school fees, you take one from your farm and make money. If you want to farm, you just take the dungs of livestock and manure is there. If you want clothes, like the one Christine is wearing, you just plug the wool of livestock and then a cloth is there. Which means livestock is almost everything. And it's for this reason that the bank, who is interested in nutrition also, programs in the area of livestock. Again, the bank thinks that we are not giving livestock the attention it deserves. Programming on livestock looks very esoteric and far removed from nature and reality. Until you hear climate change has wiped out 10,000 heads of cattle. And the government will say, what's happening? They say it's just due to heat stress, water shortage, and all that. But nobody recognizes that these are concerns until those fatalities are recognized. So it is for this reason that the bank is also taking interest in the area of livestock. 3, one more point. Most countries have tended to believe that if you do agriculture, you have done livestock, and livestock is on the periphery. And we said, no, it cannot be true. And that's why in the countries where we intervene, you could see that ministries of livestock development is always almost being promoted in various countries across the continent now. This is because of the advocacy work of the bank, because we think that we cannot leave it at the periphery. So those are some of the reasons why. And we know that we can get livelihoods, a lot of resources from livestock development. That's why the bank is taking interest in livestock. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we all have a very good picture. Yeah, that was really very picturesque. We can see it. Thank you very much. So I turn over to you. And I wonder, how is Methan Hub interested in livestock and climate finance?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I will try to be brief in the interest of time, but and thank you to the panelists and to the FDB for hosting us and to GIZ. So at the Global Methane Hub, we're a philanthropic vehicle, right? Our goal is to support and move financing and capital towards initiatives that help reduce methane emissions or manage methane emissions across the globe. Just to say that methane has contributed, it's an extremely powerful greenhouse gas, and it's contributed up to 45% of the net warming that we're experiencing today. And a lot of that also comes from agriculture and agri-food systems, and including livestock. And so this vicious circle where livestock is such an important part of our economic fabric and our social and cultural fabric, and it's obviously having to live with the stress associated with increasing vulnerability. And so from where we stand, there's really this duality of fundamentally improving the sustainability of the sector to also reduce the vulnerability, the climate vulnerability that it faces. And critically at the hub, there's obviously a food nutrition and a nutrition security question. There is equally an economic question, but there's also something that's a bit more that we really need to look at is the intensity of how we produce meat and milk, and we're going to need to triple meat production, probably double milk production, and the intensities on this continent are unfortunately very high, and part of that is due to continuous simultaneous underinvestment in the sector and climate vulnerability. And so we tend to believe that sort of a healthy livestock sector essentially allows you to control prices more, which is good for consumers, but also good for the producers. It also enables a broader sort of climate reduction in climate vulnerability, and probably opens up economic opportunity. And a byproduct of that is reduction in methane emissions, which is really great for climate, but also great for the producers. And so we're trying to work at the intersection of improving developmental outcomes and efficiently managing a huge source of climate change in a way that benefits producers and economy and overall well-being. So that's why we're interested in this.
I think we give you another chance also to go a little bit deeper. And before, now I go to my neighbor, Mr. Sheikh. Maybe we can join two questions for you. So maybe you start with your initial statement, just why is that important, the link between livestock and climate finance, and then hopefully you can share your personal experience from Senegal that you were having with mobilizing climate finance.
Right. Thank you so much, Chairperson. Thank you for GIZ and other conveners of this excellent gathering. I think it's one of the exceptional moments that we are bringing livestock on the deep dive of the climate challenges that we're facing in West Africa. I'm Cheikh Mbo, Director General of Centre de Suivi Écologique, a center which was born from the premises of the livestock crisis in the Sahel after the drought, which has affected the whole region in the 70s and the 80s. And the Senegalese government was traumatized by this event and went to United Nations to request for support. And the United Nations told them, you can't manage things you cannot measure. So you need to have a monitoring center which give you the backbone information to manage the livestock and the resource endowment that comes with it. For the interest of my center, there is three areas at least I can share. The first one is the intrinsic importance of the cultural dimension of livestock in our countries. You don't see it as many Western lenses as a pure economic and value chain process. It's first and foremost a livelihood which is embedded to the cultural values and norms and aspirations to people. And without having that picture on the front of us every day, we will be missing something extremely important because we take the normative neoclassical approach of livestock, which does not work when you deal with this kind of practices. That's the first thing that I think should be put on the table. The second is that when we talk about pastoral system and livestock, it's not a monolithic process. It's very diverse in the way it's being practiced on the ground, but also the type of ecosystem which are managed. In CSO, we differentiate the nomad system, the pastoral system in the Sahel, and the semi-intensive systems that you have more on the southern part of our countries. And in each conditions, the type of ecosystem and landscape we have in place will have a great deal of influence on the type of livestock or the climate challenges that comes with it. I'll elaborate more on that if you want, but we have to consider that livestock is not just a unique concept, it's a wicked practice, it's a wicked livelihood that we have in different ecosystems. And the last one is when we have to build resilient livestock system, is the resource endowment that sustain the livestock itself. Biomass and water are the two biggest issues that we are facing, particularly in West Africa. In CSC, we have 40 years or 45 years now, if I want to be accurate, on measuring biomass and pastoral biomass which are available for livestock. And without having this long-term evaluation and building trends out of those biomass issues, then we will completely miss the option. The second one is water. Biomass comes with quality, but the water also comes with quality and quantity. The few boreholes that we have in the Sahel cannot satisfy the water requirement for livestock. The small water bodies that we call water ponds are extremely important, and we're doing monitoring on all those resources to support the policy framework, as we mentioned. So the second part of your question is how do we deal about that? How do we take the cultural dimension, the adaptative processes, the diversity of the livestock process, and the resource endowment that sustain it? We do it with using our accreditation process. CSC is one of the exceptional operational entity with double accreditation. I can say now 3 because the GCA and African Development Bank are giving us all the South-South collaboration. But there are 2 points which I want to mention here. As you see, we aggregate in the last few years 35 million to 40 million investment into adaptation. But we have challenges. There are two types of challenges. The last one is the implementation gap, which I want to start telling you. It's important to have the capacity to elaborate a project. It's more important to have the capacity to implement a project. Project implementation seems to be trivial, seems to be given, but once you deal with extremely complex programs such as dealing with livestock, talking with farmers on the ground, mobilizing stakeholders, getting community of practice, it becomes another type of engineering, which is social engineering, that often our biophysical institution, I'm a remote sensing and agroecologist person, we do not often have the less equipment than the social scientists to do that. And this social engineering is extremely critical to implement this project with a co-design or co-implementation process. The second one is, this is the downstream, and the upstream is to elaborate those projects, and that's where many people fail. These projects are extremely complex. What you need to do the climate profiling, what you need to do the vulnerability assessment, what you need to design the objectives and make it operable in a very local scale where different vulnerable communities are involved is something often we are not able to deliver. And believe me, there is no country giving us the resources to recruit the right people to do it. Often we rely on international consultancy firm who does not know the reality, and that's where often we fail. But we managed to circumvent that, and we are quite active in our portfolio, and we managed to leverage many millions that we invest into Senegal and other areas in the area of adaptation and very soon livestock, hopefully.
Thank you very much. So you're talking also about the narrative. The narrative needs also to be adjusted to the different levels. And that is also a question, actually, I would like to pass on to you, Mohamed, because you work also with the philanthropic sector. So you have, as I understand, also philanthropic members on your organization. And it's important to understand what's their view, because it's a very complex topic, but what would they expect?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question. Two things. Obviously, we have more than 25 different philanthropies from across the world that have pooled their resources within the Global Methane Hub to do something that they themselves would be better equipped to do through us. And I think the reality is that philanthropy is very wide and different, and they come at this from different perspectives. Right? Some of them are purely interested in the climate, others are purely interested in more the development perspective. And the ability that we have at the hub, and that many people in this room have, is to really have a more complex discussion about what it means to support a sector that has both developmental outcomes as well as climate outcomes. And I think that we are an example of how sort of, people and philanthropists in general also make compromises on the way forward. But it is really important that one of the ways that we do this is by ensuring that we have a representation and voices, particularly of emerging countries and emerging markets, in the way that we shape strategies around livestock in particular, and methane mitigation or reduction in them. And I can say a little bit about how we do that, particularly from a finance mobilization perspective that's useful. If not, I can share it with others. But should I say a few words on the... Okay, so I'll just say a few things. And I mean, I guess, we have obviously resources, but they're obviously limited because of the high level of challenge that the industry or sector faces because of continued underinvestment in the sector. And so there's two things. One is this question of catalytic and seeding. We are flexible, and so we're able to rapidly use our own resources to help institutions with much larger capital assets than we would otherwise have. And so we work sort of around three levels: international public finance, and we have large partnerships, right, with a lot of the multilateral development banks. And what we do is provide resources for technical capacity that helps them essentially embed methane consideration in their livestock investments. And we leverage multiple amounts of hundreds of millions of dollars precisely by being targeted. The second is sort of national public funds, and this is things like national development banks who hold, in many, many countries, a large part of the national assets that are invested in livestock and agriculture in general, and they often lack the internal capacity or willingness, right, to adjust their systems to even track exactly what Sheikh was saying, to track the potential impact of their investment. And sort of the last is corporate resources. And I think we don't only think of this as only climate finance, but some of this has to do with the way private resources are allocated even within value chains. And that requires a degree of transparency and accountability, but it also requires exactly what Shirley was saying, which is critically understanding and harmonizing what counts as sort of productivity and abatement actions within the sector. And that clarity is extremely important for investors because they may not have the capacity internally to understand that. And so the last 4 things that we do that I think are structurally important sort of to help shape is this first thing of measurement and data. Really, really critical. Measuring and data, both at a national level, but also for project specific, is critically important. Whether it's remote sensing, whether it's like bottom up, really, really important to get that right for countries in general. The second aspect is R&D. We were able to leverage close to $250 million on an entire fermentation accelerator, specifically to address global north, global south partnerships in finding scientific breakthroughs to reduce enteric fermentation, which is a big source of methane emissions. And the last 2 things is sort of public policy as well as corporate action, which needs to be reined in. So let me stop here for now.
Yeah, but I think it's very clear what you need and what you also use your resources for. And it would be now very interesting actually to hear also from the bank's perspective what you need, because we understand so far the portfolio of livestock and, let's say, climate smart livestock is quite insignificant. I don't know, I don't dare to say that, but it seems a little bit. So what would you need from an African Development Bank perspective actually to increase the transformation into climate smart livestock in the portfolio of the bank?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have to perhaps avoid moving forward and then let us move backwards a little bit. By that I meant you can hardly do anything without data. There is paucity of data of the impact of livestock, even on climate change. And without that data, not much can be done. And the policymakers need to know this data. Otherwise, we are just going around the clock. I'm happy Eori is here and the other scientists, eggheads, who are here. They should give us data. For instance, what are we gaining by ranching with respect to climate change than open grazing? That information should be in the public domain. And that should help government and international development partners and even funders of climate change to decide what to do. Most of the information we have on livestock and climate change are written by experts in climate change, not by experts in livestock. So we need this data for informed decision making. That's number 1. Number 2, also, like I tell people, it is important to know where to go without knowing how, than to know how to go without knowing where. I think gathered in this room are people who might think that we know where we want to go, and we are coming here to ask questions. We should play up the important role livestock is playing in our livelihoods, in our nutrition, because livestock is at the center of nutrition. Talk about milk, talk about meat, talk about egg, talk about any other aspect of livestock. So those should be played up. And we need government we need everybody here to do a lot of advocacy work on government. Because government thinks that livestock is an aside activity, which is not, but it should be at the center of development planning and policy making. When those things are not on ground, it becomes very, very difficult for the bank to do anything. We're not a charity organization. We're in business to make money. We're in business to support countries and make the bank live. So if countries don't see the need to invest in livestock, African Development Bank cannot develop its own program to go and run a livestock project in any country until it is requested by that country. So this advocacy and data needs are very, very important for us to engage with government and put at their disposal this important information that will enable them make some policy changes at that level. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you prepared the floor for your neighbor, because that is actually the question. Is there anything from the African Union perspective that you could support, provide, or help with? Because there is so much expectation with regard not only to data, but with regard to policy making, with regard to policies. So please, what could you provide?
Sure, thank you very much. I think I'll just pick up from where he left. There's a number of areas one can think of, but as he mentions, research on data is key for livestock development and management, because if we have data, we can then develop relevant, informed proposals that will generate robust investment plans for livestock management and development. The other area which I feel is important is to develop a robust infrastructure for climate finance, because right now, as we speak, it's not easy to track climate finance, where it is coming from, and the impact it is making on the ground. If we have some architecture of infrastructure for climate finance, it will be easier to track, code, label, and be able to see what impact or difference it is making on the ground. Then this requires, of course, policy development that will be climate finance specific to create that enabling environment so that institutions have the ability to attract climate finance. The other area we see basically is how to work with the private sector through engagement. How do we engage the private sector and tap into the private sector resources so that we can leverage climate finance? So that's another area that one can look at, that the climate finance flowing in can leverage private sector resources and scale up investment and have bigger impact on the ground. Then, of course, we also see that this cannot happen without creating awareness. Awareness among the stakeholders, communities, all other key stakeholders. They needed to be sensitized and learn and know how significant climate finance can contribute to achieve their goals. Then, with all this happening, then also we see the relevancy of inclusivity. Youth development, youth are the future. Climate, as it is for long-term solutions. If we don't engage the youth from the beginning so that they are aware and they know that they are preparing for the future to address climate change issues, we are still going to have serious problems. Even if we pump in a lot of money, it will rather be meaningless for future solutions. Then this happens in parallel, of course, with involving women empowerment. We see in Africa, in most cases, women are the very first entry points on the ground, either farms, fisheries, trade. All these key sectors are affected by climate change. So we need to empower them, and this climate finance coming in, we should have clear actions on how women are empowered and they take active participatory role in mitigating and adapting to climate change. The list is long, but if you give me time, I can lecture on each one of the points I gave. All right?
Thank you so
Welcome.
much. Thank you very much. So, colleagues, you know that normally these rounds, they finish with making a wish. And I think this is now our moment to make a wish. So if you can have one wish to unlock finance for climate-smart livestock, what would this wish be? How to unlock finance for climate-smart livestock? I think we can all make a wish. I mean, you already shared my wish. My wish would be actually to have women on board for that. That would be my wish I would make. So please, what would be your wish?
And before women can have that wish, you need to consider that the 28% of the land use, which is livestock driven, is also given a good place in the climate change financing scheme.
So I guess, yeah, it's such a hard question, but I would say that precisely to the point of demand, I think to see continued and expanded leadership by African governments and civil society and private sector to pay very close attention to how this can become transformative for them, for our economies, for our people, and to really center people on what this process looks like.
Very nice.
Thank you, Christine. Christine, you looked into my notebook because that was the point I had. So
Sorry.
yeah. One wish I would like to see is the empirical evidence that climate smart livestock farming can reduce emissions. And this is the challenge I'm throwing to ILRI and other groups. If we have that information, the resources are there, the money is there, we'll get it. That's information we need. Thank you.
Thank you.
My wish would be basically to engage youth development and build the capacity necessary to empower them so that they move along with the mainstreaming of livestock into climate change. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think we still have other visitors to us here. Yes, and we continue. And thank you so much. Great. Great. Thank you all. Wow, that was quite a panel. And now we have the challenging task to summarize the panel. But luckily we have two people, hopefully, doing that. I hope they have arrived. Yes? Great. So I'm very happy to announce to you, we were discussing about the research and the important side of the research. So we have with us here the executive manager from CGIR, Mrs. Isman Elouafi. Great that you are here with us to try to conclude the panel discussion. Please share your impressions with us. If you like, you can take the panel or take a seat. Where do you feel more comfortable? The seat. Great. Yeah, I think we can have him too. Monsieur Sawadogo, sorry, who is actually the national part of the research. Mumuni Savadogo is the executive director of CORAF for the West African Agricultural Research, and this will be the second perspective on this closing session for today. Great. So we start with you, and then we have another closing words from you, Martin.
Heard? It's okay? Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to join you here. Thank you, Shirley and ILRI colleagues, for the invitation, and to GIZ. And I think really, as the speaker said, livestock is very important for the continent. And livestock should be part and parcel of the discussion, including when we talk about solution for climate change. And I'm really happy that we have really organizations that are really very strong and powerful and have a strong voice in this area today, from GIZ to ILRI to CORAF, but also the EU IBAR. So for the CGR centers, our shared vision is to deliver science and innovation that advance the transformation of land, water, and food systems in the crisis, in the climate crisis. So what we are looking for, it's definitely help continent, particularly Africa, to get to a better status in terms of food security, nutrition security, but in a sustainable way. And we really underline that sustainable way, and the livestock is one of the areas where we have really to focus on innovation towards sustainability, toward resilience, toward efficiency, but also toward inclusiveness. And that's where gender and youth are super important. I want to just remind everybody that the investment in research and development, not only in CGR, but on your own national system, it's at least for every dollar you get $10 revenues. And the beauty of that $10 revenues in our case, and we have very good studies to back it up, it goes to the small-scale farmers. So it's not a return to the multinationals, it's not a return to the big businesses, it's a return to small-scale producers, particularly women. So our work throughout the years have informed policies, and what we're looking for, it's a bigger impact, both impact in terms of alleviation of poverty and malnutrition, but also in terms of climate sequestration, carbon sequestration, and climate services. So despite the importance of the livestock, and we heard it today, I think it hasn't been given enough investment in terms of finance, and still we see very little climate finance go into livestock, but also it didn't get enough support in terms of policy. And that's where there is a huge potential if we invest in livestock, that we have what we call triple win, and I'm sure Shirley maybe mentioned it, whereby you are reducing emission per unit. So it's not only emission in livestock, but it's emission per kilo of meat or per liter of milk. You could get also improved resilience for those farmers, and that's an economic benefit. And the third one is nutritious. The continent still need a lot of proteins, and many of those proteins have to come from the livestock, given the ecosystem we have on the planet, on the continent. The other area I want to leave with you is that in all of this, we can do it without data, and I agree, data is very important. Data for the policymakers, but data also for investors. So that's the only way we can bring private sector to put hand in hand with public sector to really get into the different financing, innovative financing that would allow us to go to scale. And maybe my last point here is that given the work on in ILRI and other institutions in terms of innovation to reduce methane in livestock, particularly through microbiome research in human, in animals, but also microbiome in soils and the different forages and the different feeding mixture. So it's a huge potential. We need to invest more in it because the solutions we have right now are still preliminary. We need more. And that's where really my call for the African Development Bank with CORAF, with the organization, to look into our genetic resources, to find the right feeding and the right use of microbiome, as I said, that interconnect the microbiome in the soil, the microbiome in the livestock, and the microbiome in the human, which is an area that we hardly understand. And that's where we are seeing huge advancement, and we see a lot of potential for the future. So CGR stand ready to help and to really make a case for a more sustainable livestock, for food, nutrition in Africa and globally, but also for a more sustainable future for Africa as a continent and for the planet as a whole. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You prepared the floor so nicely for your colleague. Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me structure a bit my talk into a number of key points. My role here normally is to summarize to you the discussion that has just happened. And looking at it, I think what we have heard bring to us a number of considerations we need to take very, very seriously. First of it is the context. Do we have the right understanding of the context on climate, finance, and livestock? Why am I saying that? Because from the discussion, we do realize that livestock is the cornerstone of livelihoods and socioeconomic development of our continent. Livestock is very, in the diversity of systems, adapted to the context in terms of ecosystems, but also in terms of our socio-cultural norms. And this, of course, the value chain aspect comes at the top of it. Livestock is contributing to 40% of our GDP. So, the question now is, if we have the right understanding of the context, why is it so that livestock tends to be maintained at the periphery of the investment process? I think that was the question. But I do believe that research has and continues to have a role to play in getting more consolidated information that will turn around the narrative. Let's make sure that we get data that will inform rightly the different stakeholders to turn around the narrative. Because the potential of investment in the sector depends on that narrative. And I do believe that for us here, sitting here, we get it right. If not, after this discussion, I believe now we have corrected our perception of livestock importance in dealing with climate. Livestock is not only vulnerable to climate change. Actually, livestock bring us a lot of opportunities for us in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation. So once again, we have some gaps that have been highlighted. This is my second point, the gaps that have been highlighted. In addition to having the core narrative about livestock and climate finance and awareness very well aggregated and passed on to the different stakeholders, I think we have gap in terms of project engineering. It has been clearly mentioned, having the capacity to co-design and co-implement effectively projects. This is one of the gap we need to continue to fill up. We need to continue to work on. And then we need to continue to team up to make sure that we have those capacities and access to the existing potential funding and investment opportunities that are out there. We have the scientific gap. We have said a lot about it. And Elaufi, you spoke about it. And I would like to emphasize on it again. It is important that data on the impact of livestock and climate change be thoroughly measured, but also we put in place monitoring and evaluation systems in the long run. And this is the example of CSA is really telling us how important it is if we need to get the right picture of the involvement of our ecosystems, livestock, and the impact of our investment going along. We do have also some gaps in terms of, scaling the existing best practices, the technologies, and innovations. The research and development landscape, we have a number of technologies, innovations that have been proven. Some of them have been cleared from the National Research Institute to the regional ones like CORAF, SAILS, and others, to the global institutions like CGR. We have a number of technologies that are available that we can, of course, work together to scale. Putting them at scale is very important. And climate finance can help us really go to scale and to impact and accelerate the process. The path we are taking right now is not just enough. The pace we need to accelerate a bit. So we need to work together very thoroughly to do that. So going forward, what do we need to do? I think somebody mentioned here in the panel, the partnerships. Partnerships is important. And we need to improve our level of effectiveness in partnership in dealing with livestock and climate sector. We need also to have, somebody mentioned, robust infrastructure for climate finance. But I do believe that even the existing opportunities, if we partner well, we can tap into them. And there is a global call here in this room for AFDB to champion the acceleration of leveraging on existing possibilities and funding opportunities to invest very strongly in the sector for climate smart solutions. This is the global call. And of course, they are trying to do their best, but we are saying here for livestock sector, we need more. It is just not enough. And I think all of us as partners, we can team up to support the initiatives that we can together undertake to unlock the investment in the livestock sector for climate-smart livestock solutions. Dear colleagues, dear moderator, I think this session just is a call for every organization that is here and for us to have a strong political will and strong engagement towards climate livestock solutions. It has been lagging behind for so long. And I believe that from this session and going forward, we'll find ways and platform that will continue to build strongly on bringing more awareness, more understanding of the right understanding of the context, working together to fill the gaps, and taking priority actions. So we thank those who are already moving forward, and we all together need to join our hands and move very strongly and make sure, because as we unlock livestock sector investments, this is going to be a lever to the livelihoods and to sustainable socio-economic development of our continent in our regions. Once we do that, as research, of course, revealed, we know that is going to bring all the other sectors upwards. And this is very important. So this is my final word, and I want to thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.